Hello everyone, my name is Anitsu and I'm back with another episode of DigiTopics. So today the topic that I had on my mind is going to be about reading the secondary market. So reading the secondary market in Digimon is a little bit of an interesting topic because I don't necessarily see a whole lot of people discussing it and the implementations of what knowing sets in advance will do for the secondary market. So there are three types of people that I like to define that are looking and participating in the secondary market when it comes to the Digimon card game. There are those who are casual, where they're not really looking at anything at all, and by the time they do get the information that they're looking for or wanting to pick up cards, then it's usually too late and they're picking it up as sets are being released in English. Then we have the early birds, where these are the people who are slightly looking ahead and anticipating what is going to be popular based on Japanese results. So these are the type of people that'll speculate and pick up the cards when sets get released in Japan. And then the last type of person is just the all-encompasser, which is the people that just pre-order everything and get everything as it comes out, so that way they don't necessarily need to worry about anything when it comes to needing specific cards. So we could see that this type of a trend applies to a lot of cards in Digimon in terms of when a card actually spikes in price due to its increase in popularity. So we could see with Magna Angemon here as the first example, it is a rather expensive card. It didn't always used to be this expensive, and as we could take a look at its little price history here, we could see that it was at around $10 at one point, and then it started slowly increasing in price. So the big thing is reading into why that card was increasing in price and what kind of a trend that we could follow here. So we could see that the trend where it started increasing in price, it had one really small spike, then it started tapering off, and then it spiked again. And it doesn't look like the price on the card is going to be slowing down, especially since we're coming up on BT8's release, where the Mastimon deck is one of the primary decks that wants to take advantage of this card. Granted, this type of a card has always been good in like security control type decks, but Mastimon has the abilities to really take advantage of this card to a new level. But in regards to the price history and the trend that we could take a look at, we could see two separate instances of spikes happening. So the first spike was the increase in popularity due to the Japanese results and the cards that were being released in Japan. So when Mastimon was first showed off in Japan, that had people's attention because English players could see that people playing Mastimon were utilizing this card. So those early bird people were picking up this card that early. Then it started tapering off because the card got cool, all of the early birds got their copies, and now it's mellowing out, and then as we get closer and closer to BT8's release, it is increasing in price rather dramatically because of that, again, reintroduction of increased demand. And this isn't the only type of a card that sees this type of a trend. So we did see something similar to this with Beelzemon when we knew that the EX2 was going to be coming out, and it was Tamers focused. Not like Tamers as in the card type, but Tamers as in the series for the TV show. So we knew that Beelzemon was going to be getting support, and of course, as we could expect, the early birds started buying up their copies, and then the same type of trend happened where it's mellowing out and it's slowly tapering up as we get closer to EX2's release. So as we take a look at the price history, we could see that its initial price was decently high, then it started mellowing off really hard as nothing was really trying to take advantage of the card, and then the second that we get the EX2 release for Japan, we see this huge increase in price because a lot of people, again, the early birds are picking up their early copies while they're really cheap, so that way they have their copies for when EX2 comes out. And then it started tapering off again, and now it's renewing some slight popularity because we're getting closer and closer to EX2's release. So I predict that upon EX2's release, if the card isn't going to mellow out again, then it's just going to keep increasing in price because, well, people want to play this card with the new Beelzemon in the new Beelzemon deck come EX02. And again, we could see this trend follow through various different cards. So Black War Greymon is another example where he really wasn't doing anything, so he had a rock bottom price of like $5, and then all of a sudden when BT8 got announced for Japan, his price skyrocketed really quickly, and then as that initial early bird hype died down, and we were just waiting for BT8's release. Then it started cooling off, and then now that we're upon BT8's release, it's starting to spike up again, just because people want to pick up the card to be played in the new Black War Greymon deck. And then another recent example is going to be in the form of Veemon. So this is the BT03 version of Veemon, and we could see that he started off with a relatively high price. Then as decks moved away from him, he fell out of favor. And now that he's reaching a new wave of hype, his price is increasing as a result of that newfound demand for what the card is going to be used in BT8. And then we could see this type of a trend start to form with a lot of different cards in the game based on what comes out in Japan. So we could see that with Grand Kawagamon as an example, even though it didn't reach a new wave of hype, it did already start getting bought out by some early bird adopters because of what BT9 is going to be holding for this version of Grand Kawagamon to be an even more playable card. He was just an okay card to be using in BT4 and BT5, and then he had a huge spike in terms of price, again, with the announcement of what he's going to be played with in BT9. And we could see the same type of a trend with WereGarurumon for the BT9 hype for when Metal Garurumon X Antibody comes out, because this is a really good card to combo with X Antibody. So we could see that he had some initial hype, and then once the hype died down, nothing really came of the card, and the card wasn't being super used, so the price got really, really low to about sub $1, and then it started slowly increasing in price as those early adopters were taking advantage of the fact that the card's price was relatively low, and it's going to be a really played card in a very powerful deck. But that's just the kind of thing that I want a lot of players to be aware of, is just reading the market and how to read the market, and it does play into looking ahead and knowing what is to come, so that way you're not blindsided by cards that are going to be supported that really weren't supported before, and as a result, the price of these cards are going to be increasing. But that's not to say everything is going to be increasing. Some expensive cards are actually starting to decline just because of the lack of popularity and the changes that are going to be coming in the coming meta. So we know that Lilithmon was a very powerful card and saw a lot of play from her inception, and saw even more play thanks to Mega Digimon Fusion and the Lilith Loop style of deck in BT5. As a result, her price went up due to the popularity of that deck, and then as that deck just kind of stayed around, she really didn't do a whole lot past her initial deck, and as people just didn't really look to pick up that deck as much, she kind of just stayed steady, and now that that deck is finally starting to fall off come BT8, just because the Eismon restriction is really limiting and harming the deck, it's going to start falling a little bit harder. So I don't necessarily think this card is going to crash, it's just a card that's on the decline because of the change in the current environment. And we can see the same exact thing happen with Seraphimon from BT01, because this is another card where it only had some initial hype just because of what it was doing and how it was being played in the Yellow Hybrids deck. Even though Yellow Hybrids is still going to be a relatively strong deck, the attention is more on Mastimon as the premier control deck, and Yellow Hybrids is looking for other tech and tools to think about utilizing, even though this is still going to be a very playable card. It's just seeing a decline just because everyone is putting more attention on Mastimon. And then certain cards are kind of interesting in how they react based on reprints. So we know that TK from BT01 is another really good and important meta-defining card just because Yellow doesn't really have any other memory-fixing tamers but this card. So that puts a lot of attention on this card specifically because there is no other Yellow card that does what TK is doing. TK also has some very specific synergies that you could line up, and he's just a good card in general, warranting a relatively decent price tag just because of all of the different decks that want to adopt him. But what people might not have realized is that TK actually did get a reprint, and the reprint kind of didn't really do a whole lot to affect this card's price. So we could see that as Yellow kind of took a fall in popularity, TK wasn't as in demand, and now that Yellow is increasing in popularity again, TK is going up in price. But I don't necessarily see this TK's price going that much further down. It probably will see a little bit of a hit because we actually do have a card that is semi-comparable to what TK is doing in terms of having a generically decent Yellow memory-fixing tamer in the form of Kari. But just because Kari is coming out, I don't think the card's price is going to decrease that much. it's probably going to level out, and it's up to the meta to define how good and how usable that type of a card is going to be. But like I stated before, it actually did get a reprint, and again, the reprinted version and the original version isn't really changing in terms of its overall demand and popularity on how it wants to be adopted into a lot of decks. So even though the card was reprinted and it has more of this into the secondary market, again, there's just so much demand for the card that the reprint really didn't even do anything at all to crush the price of the card, and usually that's the whole intended purpose of the reprint, is to get more copies in the player's hands, and usually when more copies are in the player's hands, more copies are going to hit the secondary market, and then the price is going to fall. And as we could see, the price really didn't do that even with the reprint hitting the secondary market. And then the Purple Matte Tamer is behaving in a very similar fashion, just because this is the only memory fixing tamer that Purple has access to. It's a very good card to use in combination with the Cherubimon and Purple Hybrids deck currently, and as a result of that deck, it did actually see a huge increase in price just because of its overall demand and playability in not only just this Purple deck, but various other Purple decks as well. So as new players are coming into the game, they're looking to pick up certain cards, and Matt was one of those more appealing cards just because he was one of the cheaper memory fixing tamers that could go into lots of very powerful Purple decks. And we could see that even with his reprint, again, the reprint really didn't affect the price of the card that much just because it had that much demand and it was still a very playable card. And speaking of reprints, depending on certain announcements, it actually could make the card's price go up even more. So we knew that we just got announced that the Starter Deck 11 is not going to be coming in English at all. Instead, in BT10, it's going to be a box topper, and we're going to be getting some of the reprints that way. Except what they're doing with that box topper is it's going to be a 1 in 16 chance to pull any of the 1 in 16 cards that got alt art reprints. One of them just so happens to be Greymon, and the starter deck Greymon is one of the more popular and more powerful red cards that we have to be playing around with, and as a result, because it's not getting a meaningful reprint, its price actually is slowly going up, just because they know that the reprint isn't going to affect the price of the card at all. So as we could see, it already had a pretty decent initial price, and it just kept going up and up and up, and then it started plateauing, and then as it was starting to plateau, we get the announcement, and now that we got the announcement that the reprint isn't going to be mattering as much, it started creeping back up again. And even though this card was already reprinted once before, again, it wasn't reprinted in a quantity that really would help suppress the price of the card, and in fact, the promo is actually holding more value just because it's harder to get this than the base version of the card. But another card that did get announced a reprint in the BT10 as another box topper as part of the Starter Deck 11 stuff is going to be Taikimiya, and again, Taikimiya is following that same trend that Greymon just did, where he already was a pretty solid card, being Red's best generic memory fixing tamer. Marcus is more specific for Greymon based synergy, but not all red decks are Greymon based synergy decks. So that just makes Tai the best red tamer to use by default, and we could see that his price went up just because of all of that initial hype for red, and it was still continue to climb until it had a little bit of a plateau when we figured out that he was going to get a reprint. But now that we know that reprint isn't going to matter at all just because it's not going to be in the quantity that we need it to be, his price is going to slowly climb up again. But on the flip side, sometimes, even though we know that a reprint is going to be coming, it doesn't necessarily suppress the price of the card because the reprint isn't here yet. So we know that Davis is going to get reprinted in a promo packet given into the Jesmon and Ragnalordmon starter decks. But because we don't have those starter decks yet, that doesn't necessarily mean people are going to start selling off their copies of the card just because he's the best blue tamer that we have. Even though we do have other good blue alternative memory fixing tamers, and we do get another one in BT8, again, Davis is the more preferred one because of what he's doing and how he's being played in the current environment and in the current meta. So we could see that his price just kept going up and up and up as blue became one of the more popular and more played colors, and with blue staying as popular and powerful as it is, it only keeps his price as high as it possibly can, and even though, yes, the reprint is coming, his price should be going down when that reprint hits, but the reprint is not here yet, so if you're just looking to wait, you might have to wait a little bit longer to pick up your copies of Davis, just because his price isn't going to be going down anytime soon. Now, I think after BT8, once Blue's hype and popularity dies down a little bit, his price is going to fall, and then it's going to continue to fall until we get that reprint, and then I don't know exactly the quantity in which that reprint is going to matter, but if it's in a decent quantity in terms of adding overall stock into the secondary market for the card, then it should help suppress the price a little bit and have a new price for that promo, as we saw with all of the other promos that are going to be somewhat comparable to what base Davis is. So, like with Davis and Pulsemon before, a reprint sometimes actually can help suppress the price of the card. Even though in Davis's case we don't have the reprint yet to actually start suppressing the price, we did actually get a more immediate reprint in the form of Sunnarizumon. So the reprint of Sunnarizumon, even though it was handled a little bit on the poor side, it still was enough to help suppress the price of the card. So we saw that he was actually holding a pretty solid price tag at around 35, almost $40 at one point, and then the reprint got announced and started getting distributed, and his price started going down as a result. Now, that didn't crush the card completely, it just made it a little bit easier to get the card, and there's more of him in the market floating around for other players to start thinking about buying and absorbing themselves into their collections. And we did see something similar to this with Pulsemon all the way back in BT5, where he was originally announced for BT4, and we got him in BT4, and he held a very high price tag just because of how playable that card was. And then he got a pretty sizable reprint as an event promo, and that event promo helped suppress and crush the price of the card, and he's got another event promo version of him with a stamp, and again, that helped continue to suppress the price of the card. Even though he does have still a pretty decent price tag, it's not what it once was, which is the whole point of the reprint to begin with, or at least the intended purpose, as long as it's not an alt art version. Because some people will hold the alt art in higher demand just because it is a different version of the card that could be more special than the original. And the interesting thing is, with all of these fluctuations in terms of card prices, it actually is affecting the booster boxes that they're coming from's EV, and when the EV of a booster box increases, then it increases the overall demand for that booster box, thus dictating a higher price. So because we know that Special Booster 1.0 and 1.5 are really good sets because of all of the cards that they're holding in terms of like really high value cards, and the price of those cards are increasing, it warrants an increase in their box price because everyone is going to be buying these booster boxes to try to crack open packs to find the card to either use to play or sell themselves. And 1.0 is also in that same category, but we did see examples of this in previous other sets as well, like in BT04 Great Legends. It actually did have a bit of an increase just because it had some really good cards for a lot of hybrid decks to be adopting, but this is just to show you that the prices of booster boxes is going to increase as the value of various other cards inside a said booster box increases along with the overall demand for said cards and said set. But there actually is a fourth type of person that is coming in and participating in the secondary market when it comes to TCGs, and that is going to be the latecomers. So the latecomers are exactly as it sounds. They're the ones that are entering the game a little bit on the late side, so they're having to deal with the secondary market in its current state, rather than being a more active participant, and sometimes that could be a little bit off-putting, but for the most part, Digimon is a rather cheap game, and it is mostly just specific cards that are going to be spiking in price, and specific cards that have a really high price tag overall, so don't let some of these price tags dissuade you from picking up the game if you are one of those latecomers, and the game is still a rather accessible game. Newer sets usually will hold a lower price tag because, well, they're the newest set, and they're going to be the ones that are the most in circulation. So that's going to help keep their price of the booster box down. On top of the fact that I believe, like in a normal style of booster box, your average SR is actually going to be $1 to $2 in terms of price, and your average rare is going to be about 50 cents to $1. So for the most part, the game as a whole is generally relatively inexpensive if you're just looking to pick up something quick and easy to play. And it's more of specific cards that are going to hold those higher price tags, demanding where the most of your budget is when it comes to deck construction. But hopefully all of this helps you get a better understanding on how to read the Digimon card game's secondary market, at least in its current form, because I think understanding and knowing how the market trends work is something really important, so that way you could figure out how best to take advantage of the secondary market to make it work for you rather than you work for it. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and down in the description below are a couple of different ways you could support me and the channel. So I do have a TCG Player affiliate link, so when you use that link to buy cards off of TCG Player, then some of that money will go to supporting me and the channel. I also do make and sell playmats over on Overcard Gamers on Facebook, so when you buy a playmat with my design, then some of that money will also go to help supporting me and the channel. And on top of all of that, I do have a Twitch account over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, so giving me a follow and a subscription also helps support me there, and I do play Digimon on top of various other games on that platform as well. So thank you everyone for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.